Immediately before the Renaissance, you had these huge UFO battles over various European cities. Huge triangular craft, spheres of various colors, attacking each other, some of them falling from out of the sky. What a lot of people are concerned about, including people in the deep state of our own government,
Sure.
is that the bad guys won. In the struggle over reshaping human history, we wound up losing a rebellion against a control system that abides to this day.
Who is actually in the driver's seat when it comes to these sort of scientific paradigm shifts? Who is pumping these ideas through these architects?
The religious control system on the planet.
And so what is that?
This thing is very similar to a thing that happened in our biblical records where a Lord presented Moses with a pattern to build a tabernacle. They came out of the sky, they handed him stone tablets, and this phenomena that's taking place today is as old as our history.
At the time the Black Plague breaks out, there are many UFO sightings. There are sightings of objects that land in fields. It was so prominent that hysteria broke out about it in the French court, and Charlemagne was considering declaring war on the tyrants of the air.
3 men and a woman were seen descending from these aerial ships. The entire city gathered about them, saying that they were magicians sent by Charlemagne's enemy to destroy the French harvest.
The plague broke out only after these people would land in the fields, and they would go around with these hoods on and these spray cans, and these guys would walk and deliver door-to-door service, spraying the doors of individual homes, where then the plague would break out.
Well, who are these people?
Exactly. Ingo Swann is being tasked to remote view the moon, and here's what he saw there. He saw tall Nordic people conducting slave labor on the moon. What does that say about who these people are? Number one, it says that they're people.
I went into another room where there was a chair. A man came in while I was trying to find a way out there. And this was a human-looking person. They had passed in a crowd, this individual, and on Earth.
Different parts of the brain have different activities.
Well, you know that, don't you?
Maybe you should interview me.
Jason Reza Jorjani, thank you for joining me.
I can't believe I made it into heaven with Jesse Michels.
I know. What did you think you weren't going to make it? Do you think where do you think you were more of a purgatory guy, or what was your?
Well, I mean, yesterday was definitely purgatory. I tell you, I've flown a lot, and to have 2 airplanes break down, and a 7-hour delay,
yes,
it was a little bit weird.
It's super weird. Well, that's the perfect segue, weirdness in reality, for what I want to cover with you, because I think you're one of the few people who studies UFO history and the nuts and bolts side, but you also kind of understand some of the deeper underpinnings and architecture of what's going on. I think there's like the kind of, it's like the bell curve or something. If you're like kind of really dumb and normie, like you don't think anything's going on. You think it's like all Occam's razor, like, kind of, there's nothing to see here. And then you get into the like middle of the curve. It's like only nuts and bolts. It's like, all just saucers and a hanger. And then once you get deep enough or something, on the right side of the bell curve, its consciousness is somehow extremely fundamental to all of this. And you get into weird stuff around secret societies and psychic warfare, and it gets weird. And so it feels like you are really deep into all of that stuff.
Yeah, one thing I would take exception to in terms of the bell curve analogy there is that I basically agree with what you're saying, except I think that there's a place on the other side of the bell curve from where the normies are, who deny that anything much is going on at all. And then people who, let's say, have read Carl Jung on UFOs and appreciate the extent to which this phenomenon involves the co-constitution of physical reality by consciousness and so on and so forth. There's a place on the other side of that bell curve where someone can, as it were, fall off the deep end And I think it's also a psychological defense mechanism.
Mm.
You can wind up developing such an abstract meta interpretation of these phenomena that you're actually occluding or occulting some more tangible aspects of it that are deeply disturbing. And so that acts also, I think, both as a psychological defense mechanism for the particular researcher who may want to interpret this all as like the Kantian thing in itself, which we will never know. And it's like,
Yes.
it's intrusions into our reality and our limited frame of interpretation, right, based on human consciousness. The denial of our capacity to ultimately discern what's going on with this phenomenon can also be a way to defer responsibility for dealing with some very tangible things that are going on that are deeply disturbing and that have very serious sociological and political implications.
I couldn't agree more. I think some people who are so far off the deep end in the consciousness realm are there because it's unfalsifiable.
Yeah.
And because it's like impossible to study, because it really doesn't even touch our consensus reality. So you don't need to justify it. It turns into its own sort of cult. But you said something very interesting there. You said there's some deeply disturbing things going on in just the kind of more prosaic nuts and bolts, version of the UFO story. What do you mean by that?
Let me come to that in a moment.
Okay.
But before we, scare the bejesus out of the listeners right off the bat, let me give a little bit more historical context for what I was saying.
Yes.
So, without naming names, Kant has become, I think, very important to some people who have taken a very abstract approach to interpreting what's going on with the UAP phenomenon. And if you look at Immanuel Kant's own life, here's a guy, and by the way, I wrote about this in my first book, Prometheus and Atlas. There's a whole chapter where I discuss Descartes and Kant and basically the constitution of the world picture of the Age of Enlightenment, right? And the thing about Kant is that in his youth, he actually took the time and care to read the entirety of Emanuel Swedenborg's Arcana Coelestia, The Secrets of Heaven, which has all kinds of accounts of extraterrestrials living on various planets and different gradations of existence, right, and planes of being and so on and so forth. And there's also, more significantly, a ton about psi abilities in that book, about clairvoyance and telekinesis and so on and so forth. Well, Kant reads all of this, and then he writes the groundwork of the metaphysics of morals in a way that develops an abstraction based on Swedenborg. He's using Swedenborg, but then he's warping the metaphysical structure of Swedenborg's work in order to construct an unknowable reality beyond the veil of appearances that's conditioned by the limits of our own consciousness. And if you read his earliest writings, which he suppressed in his own lifetime, Kant admits that the reason that he did this is that the stuff in Swedenborg is so disturbing that it would destabilize society, including on a political level. So what Kant wants to do is create this metaphysical model that allows him to define what he calls a kingdom of ends, where each human being is an end in himself, a moral agent equal to every other person. And then based on this, he can frame this categorical imperative that you should never use any other person as a means, and every person should be treated as an end in himself, right? It's like the Archimedean point of his whole moral system. Well, he does this by misappropriating and distorting Swedenborg and covering over both the psychic and telekinetic accounts in Swedenborg's writings, and also the accounts of, various forms of extraterrestrial intelligence. And I see the same move being made today in certain sectors of the UAP conversation.
Well, it's fascinating. I mean, that's a great book, Prometheus and Atlas. Everybody should buy it. It's this sort of sweeping philosophical treatise where you go through the advent of empiricism and reason and, the Enlightenment and figures like Kant and Descartes. And in Kant's case, I think you also say that the occult, the reason to keep the occult or sort of separate somehow or off limits is because it would involve a storming of heaven or something. And did he have a political motive in doing this? Because with Descartes, I think you say that he was a Jesuit spy, and maybe
Descartes was literally a Jesuit spy. In other words, Descartes was in the employ of people who were holier than the Pope. That phrase, holier than the Pope? These were agents of the Vatican that were acting against the sort of like status quo modus operandi of the Catholic Church in France. They were like more zealous than the Pope, and they were Jesuits. And they had sent René Descartes to infiltrate the Rosicrucian order and to develop a false scientific paradigm that would reduce everything in the physical world to basically mechanical causality, which then has the effect of relegating everything that can't be encompassed within a mechanistic grid and framework of interpretation into the realm of the spiritual, which is in the domain of the Catholic Church, right? So then the Church gets to continue to have a monopoly on discourse about anything spiritual, and the common citizen is presented with a scientific paradigm that's soul-crushingly nihilistic, so that he will then remain within the arms of the Church.
And you think that was Descartes' mission?
Absolutely.
To do that?
Yeah, he was a hired Jesuit agent. I mean, the guy was literally a stormtrooper who functioned as a military intelligence attaché to Catholic armies that were going through Protestant villages and burning them to the ground and, basically engaging in a inquisitory religious war against the Protestants of France. And this is the guy who we trace our modern scientific paradigm to. Now, Kant wasn't, a paid agent of anybody, as far as I can tell. But he definitely had political motivations, right? And the thing is, Kant's political motivations are not something, antiquarian and, only relevant to his own epoch. We still face the same concerns that he did as a serious thinker grappling with evidence for the paranormal. So, for example, as I point out very early on, and, I've come back to this over and over again in the 14 books that I've written, but it's right there in Prometheus and Atlas from the beginning. If you consider what it would mean for telepathy, clairvoyance, telekinesis, or what we call psychokinesis these days, to achieve mainstream scientific recognition, and for large numbers of people to then adopt training protocols for these latent human abilities, right? The way that we have now a lot of the remote viewers offering remote viewing training. Imagine what kinds of social challenges that faces us with, right? I mean, if people become adept telepaths or adept clairvoyants, there's no such thing as privacy left. There's no physical privacy left. Anyone can see you doing whatever you're doing inside the privacy of your own home. Anyone can even step into your mind, like the remote viewers, for example, who were tasked to psychically spy on Saddam Hussein during the first Gulf War, Lynn Buchanan and others. They actually went into Saddam's mind to the extent that, for example, they would get ill when he was ill and so on and so forth. And
yes.
So this is like a horrendous violation of personal privacy. And then when you go to psychokinesis, it's even worse, right? So there's this direct mental influence on living systems that's been studied in a very serious way by parapsychologists.
Different parts of the brain have different activities.